Stones of Strength podcast, an audio plinth from upon which we will endeavor to centralize and showcase stories and information related to the lifting of historical and non-historical stones and the ongoing development and re-emergence of stone lifting culture. Welcome to episode 4 of the Stone of Strength podcast. We got a great show on deck for everybody. In this episode, we chat with Sean Urqhart, who has freshly returned from the first ever historical stone lifting tour in Ireland. While there, he joined forces with David Keohan and lifted some 16 historical Irish stones. In addition, we talked to Sean about some of the work that he's done researching, finding, and lifting historical stones on the Faroe Islands, as well as in Iceland. And then we also hope to get into some of his training techniques that he uses to build strength for stone lifting, because he's an incredibly strong and accomplished stone lifter.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this chat. I think a lot of people are pretty excited about this episode as well. A lot of people had reached out to us as Sean was in Ireland, just saying, you got to get this guy on. We really want to hear about it. And so we've done that. It looked like it was an incredible trip, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say about it.
So by the time this episode comes out, the registration for our gathering event here in Edmonton will be open. There's only about 20 spots open, so if you're interested in coming, if you're from Edmonton, Alberta, or even from Western Canada or Eastern Canada, as we found out, because we do have some people who are going to be attending from Eastern Canada, please don't wait. Please get your name on the list as quick as possible. Again, there's only a limited number of spots, and we'd hate for you to miss out if it's something you're really looking forward to participating in.
Like at the start of the other episodes, we just want to take a moment and thank everybody. We've been getting, a lot of positive feedback, and it's just fantastic to us. We absolutely love doing this, and we're really, really happy to know that other people are enjoying the show. A lot of people are tagging us on Instagram, which is wicked, because, that's where we talk. That's where we share our videos. So we're doing our best to repost as many of these as we can, and we hope that's okay with you. So just keep tagging us, and we'll keep doing what we can.
All right, so I guess without further ado, let's jump into the episode. Everybody, please welcome our guest, Sean Urqhart. Well, Sean Urqhart, welcome to the Stone of Strength podcast. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're fresh off of, freshly returned from an incredible adventure over to Ireland, doing what is essentially the inaugural, the very first historical stone tour in Ireland. And we're going to touch on that in a little bit here, because I'm sure you're just buzzing and full of stories. But what we'd like to do is sort of just set the foundation for your introduction into strength sports and into historical stone lifting and stone lifting in general. So if you can, for us, take us back to the beginning. What was your intro into strength sports?
So all the way back in high school, I was always an athlete, playing multiple sports. And my top two were football and baseball. And I was pretty successful in baseball, winning a bunch of awards. And kind of when high school ended, I stopped doing any type of athletic endeavors at all, entirely. So I went to college, met my wife. I still trained and did some stuff, but I had no direction, no purpose, no drive. And my grandparents, they live in Detroit, Michigan, and they would take us to the St. Andrew's Scottish Festival every single year. And we would go there, and one year, I started getting into photography, so I'm taking pictures and I'm watching these guys, and I was just fascinated by it. And so I just told myself, I'm like, next season, when the season starts, I'm going to research this. And no matter how ready I am, no matter how prepared I am, no matter how much I suck, I don't care. I'm going to compete at a local show, and I just need to do something. So I competed, and I did pretty well. I ended up taking first in my class.
Good. Yeah, that's pretty well.
My numbers weren't great by any means, but I did good enough that I won, and I became hooked at that point. So I did the Highland Games I think I competed for 10 or 12 years. I did compete professionally for a little while, a low level professional, nothing outstanding at all. But I had met Ryan Stewart on the pro circuit. I met him on his very last game when he retired up in Alaska. I had met him we kind of crossed paths for the first time. And so we've been talking a little bit before and a little bit after, and he had, gotten into stone lifting. And even at that point we're talking, and I still hadn't done any stone lifting at all. And then I went to a competition. It was called a Highlander. I don't even know if they're still around anymore, but it was half Highland Games, half strongman. And at the very end of it, my friend John O'Connor, he has a gym in Indiana. He was hosting it, and he brought out these stones. And he's like, anybody who wants to lift these stones, come get together right now. Everyone, we're going to lift these stones. And I think the smallest one was 260 pounds or something like that. Never touched a stone in my life. And I picked it up, and I was able to shoulder it for the first time. And I was literally just hooked. I could not stop thinking about stones. And after that time, Ryan has started traveling a little bit for his stuff. And then there's another guy from Utah. His name was Brian Hunsacker. He was traveling and lifting stones. And so I'm following these two guys on Instagram. And I was just like, I couldn't stop thinking about stones, but I didn't have any stones. I had nothing. Um, and so like 9 months go by and I'm just hanging out in the woods with my son. I think he was like 2 or 3 at the time. And I spot these boulders. And I think it was like December 31st, January 1st, something like that. I'm like, all right, I'm sick and tired of training in the gym. I went out to the woods. I took a stone. I rolled it to my yard because I wasn't strong enough to carry it. And then I just picked it up. And I was like, holy shit, this is what I meant to do. And from that moment on, I just was obsessed with stone lifting. I think that was 2019. So it's only been about what,
Yeah.
4 years or so. I just became obsessed, and that's basically how it started.
And
You know.
you went to Scotland that year as well, is that right? So that was your first stone lifting trip, was it 2019?
Yep. So I lifted that stone, and then I think right after, or somewhere close to that time, that Stoneland documentary came out for Rogue, and I watched it with my wife, and I'm like, God, this would be amazing to go to Scotland. Like, I'm loving lifting stones, but I don't think I could ever go. Like, I'm not the adventurous type. I'm very reserved. I don't gamble. I don't do things like that. I'm very kind of keep to myself. I don't go out and do those types of things. And she's like, well, what are you waiting for? Like, you have one life to live, essentially. There's nothing stopping you. You have to go do it. And I'm like, well, I don't even know who I'd go with. And then we're just talking, and she's like, just go with your dad. And I'm like, he's not going to want to go to Scotland with me to lift a bunch of stones. That's like the dumbest trip ever. And so I asked him, and he's like, I would love to go with
Awesome.
you. So him and I went in 2019. We did castles, we did distilleries, we did a Highland game, um, we did stones, and yeah, ever since then, my dad's been on every trip but one with me.
When
Yeah, it's
we
been
went
pretty
to
cool.
Scotland last fall, we went with our parents as well. And I think the thing that they appreciated, other than it was a cool family bonding experience when we're there lifting stones and sort of celebrating our Scottish heritage. But the stones were almost an avenue to explore parts of Scotland that you never really would if you were just going down there to do the typical tourist circuits, right? Like you're traveling these backcountry roads up over the mountains, into graveyards, into old derelict castles. Like it was an amazing experience to see just a huge amount of the country and a huge amount that typically people would not get to experience. So
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And on all the trips I've gone on, there's things that I've seen that a normal tourist will
yeah,
never get to
Sure.
experience. And I can't even imagine going anywhere on vacation ever again without it being that kind of trip, because you're doing yourself a
yeah,
disservice, because there's so much to see of the culture and the people and the country. Like, I don't know. It's not even about the stones at
Oh
that point.
yeah, that's very fair. And so what I was telling Dale before we jumped on here, it's really cool to talk to you for a number of reasons, but I was trying to think back to when I started stone lifting. That was only a few years ago. And I first started following hashtags and all that on Instagram just to try and learn a little bit about, not just necessarily, I didn't know how much there was actual stone lifting culture out there. But you, correct me if I'm wrong, was it you that hosted Ohio's Strongest Celt? You were part of
Kinda.
that though. Am I remembering that right?
I, yeah. So the Ohio Scottish Games, they reached out to me,
Yeah.
and I think it was right before or right after the whole COVID thing happened. And so the festival itself got canceled for 2 years, and I tried to host like an online thing, and it didn't really pan out the way that I thought it was. We had a few submissions and stuff. We had people from all over the world. We had somebody from I think Australia. We had Iceland. We had Canada. We had, I think, Hawaii possibly. And then a few people in the States, but really there wasn't that big of a turnout. And then we ended up having it in person last June, um, and it went okay. For the first year that we've ever had it in person, I think it was all right. It could have been better. Um, but then after the festival ended, we met with the board of directors and things like that, and I asked for some things, and I asked for more support, and it really wasn't. Uh, it wasn't given to me. There really was the support that I was asking for wasn't there, and they weren't willing to kind of put forth, budget or other resources like that I had asked for. Because the first year I did it out of my own pocket, like everything. I paid for all the food, all the prizes and stuff like that. I was paying for myself, um, and so I just asked for little things, and we didn't see eye to eye exactly. So the the Ohio Strongest Celt unfortunately ended as quickly as it started.
Oh, that's
Um,
too bad. I was actually involved in the online one in 2021, and that's what
I
I
remember that.
yeah, I thought was so cool because that was like my introduction, like I was saying to it a bit, and seeing the submissions from all over the world really opened my eyes. Like, there's not just the historical element of it all, which there certainly is, but seeing people like myself that are just getting into it and lifting from all over the world, I thought that was really really neat and kind of opened my eyes to a lot of this out there. And I thought it was fun. It was me and Josh Goldthorpe from Canada, I think,
Yep.
because Josh, I believe he put his 280-pound stone on his back and then bent a steel bar because there was like
Yeah.
the most creative lift.
He's not a normal dude.
No, he's not. He's awesome, but I believe he won the most creative one. And I don't know who typed that up with us. You're not, but they said he's a mix of Louis Cyr and Chuck Norris. He cracked me up. I turned eyes 2 years ago. I thought that was a good line.
Yeah.
Interesting you talked about sort of the global community, because that's something that's even by way of doing this podcast, we're seeing that. I mean, there is a global stonelifting community. It may not be great as far as the number of people that comprise a community, but it's a global thing. It's absolutely. And one of the things that you had sort of touched on, and I just wanted to circle back on before we get into some of your recent adventures, is you talking about that first time you picked up the stone, that sort of feeling you got. We have had that feeling. A lot of the people that we lived with had that same feeling. Do you think that it takes a unique person or personality picking up a stone to have that experience, or do you think that, given the opportunity, anyone who has any sort of affinity or passion for strength sports, picking up a stone would realize like this is a unique and very very interesting strength endeavor?
I think anybody who has any interest in any type of strength sports, whatever that may be, I think they will get bit by the stone bug.
Yeah.
Um, even like I was outside in the backyard today, and my 4-year-old daughter, she's begging me. She's like, let's go train." And so I give her my old open stone that I used for Highland Games training. It's only 16 pounds, but she's doing Husafell carries around the backyard.
That's awesome.
My boys are, they're swinging a kettlebell, and my other son's running sprints with the sled, and like they pick up a stone. They just think it's the coolest thing in the world. We went up to the UP and we went to the beach, and they're picking up stones in the water, and I'm picking up stones with them. And there's just something, people are like, oh, I get connected with my ancestors, and I can feel their spirits. And I don't jump. I don't like all that stuff. That's hocus pocus, whatever. I just think it's so primal. There's something about it that just makes you feel, I don't know, it just makes you feel good inside. I don't know what
Yeah.
it is. And you
Yeah.
conquer that stone, that piece of earth or whatever it is. And
It's such a
I
challenge,
don't
right?
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of kids, I got two little boys. One's 5 and one just turned 3. And the 3-year-old in particular is really into stone lifting. And he's come down with us a couple of times when we're lifting at the Granite Garden. And I was shopping the other day and standing at the deli counter getting some meat. And I hear, "Daddy, Daddy." I turn around and he's got a cantaloupe up on his shoulder with his other arm extended out. He's like showing me how he'd shouldered this cantaloupe standing in our shopping cart. So it's
Awesome.
but as a kid, right, you're always trying to climb the fastest, hucking stones on the beach. How many skips can you get? Like that sort of passion to test yourself physically is always there, right? So now this is just the evolution, right? You're not throwing stones. You're a little kid. You're
Exactly.
picking them up and sticking them on your shoulder. Yeah. So speaking of picking up stones and massive ones at that, I mean, like we'd said at the intro, like you're fresh back from an incredible and groundbreaking trip in Ireland with our previous guest, David Keohan, who is like, what an incredible person. And we could probably talk about that too, because I think you could probably spend an entire episode talking about what it's like to travel around with him. Like Rogue, if anyone who's listening has any affiliation with Rogue, contact them and get them to send a crew out to follow David around and make a documentary, because they're missing out on an incredible story that's unfolding in real time. But
100%.
how did you get in touch with David? How did this whole journey start?
So he started finding. Well, I think we actually, for my online Ohio Strongest Celt, he had submitted this amazing video. He had a friend come out and film him. He must have like, I think David just, he's such a fun loving, positive, well spoken guy that he just has friends and connections everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, and so he made this video where he was on the Copper Coast, which is, 10, 15 minutes outside of Galway, where he lives in Ireland. And he had somebody with a drone, and the drone comes over the top of these mountains, and these cliffs are like 100, 200 feet high. And it's coming down, and you could watch him lifting these stones on the beach that he's training with on the Atlantic. Um,
That's cool.
he submitted it. It was like freaking awesome. So I think that's the first time we really like got to know who we were. But we at that point we really weren't even talking. He just kind of submitted it. We were following along with each other, this and that. And then he went to Scotland and he came home and he started doing the research. And I just was like, these stones that he's finding are amazing. And so we
Mhm.
just reached out to each other and we started talking through Instagram. And he just kept telling me, he's like, come to Ireland, come to Ireland. I want to show you around. Just come. I'm like, okay, okay, sure, okay. And he's like, no, seriously, come to Ireland. He's like, I'm going to show you a great time. We're going to go lift stones together. And this whole time he's telling me to do that, I'm researching Sweden for like the past like probably 2 or 3 years. And there's like 150, 160 stones in Sweden that we found. And I keep telling myself I'm going to go to Sweden to lift stones. And that was the plan the whole time. And then he keeps finding these amazing stones with amazing history in these beautiful locations. And I just told myself, I was talking to Ryan Stewart, we were going to go to Sweden together. And I just basically, I'm like, dude, I can't go to Sweden. There's no way. Like, I don't care if there's 2,000 stones. Like, Ireland looks like the most amazing place on earth to be lifting stones. I have to go to Ireland. And so I reached out to David, and he's like, "Yes, come to Ireland. Tell me when you're going to come." I gave him like a time frame. And he's like, "Okay, I took the week off. Let's go." And I'm
Awesome.
like, "I
What a
don't even
guy.
know you.
Yeah.
We've only spoken on Instagram. Like, I don't even know you. Like, I don't even know what your voice sounds like, or I don't know you from any other dude in the world." And he's just come. We're just gonna do it. And I reached out to him, and the rest is history. It was just incredible.
I think that sort of personality he has is what's made him so successful. He just throws himself into things, right? We talked to him like he went from the couch to a marathon to a kettlebell world champion to a stone lifter and an adventure, and week after week going out and finding these new stones. That is not something that can be done by a person with a passive personality type.
No,
So
no,
he must have been just a blast
incredible.
to travel with, man.
He luckily for me, he's more of the talker.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Like,
fair.
he's telling me about this and that, and he's pointing out stuff on the road and telling me about the history and the culture of Ireland and all different things like that. And I'm just soaking it all in and just listening to him talk. And luckily for us, he also has amazing connections with all these people in the different areas. And so we're meeting up with, local historians on Inishmore and historians and guys who lifted the actual stones on Inishbofin. And then, we go to Galway and we meet up with this Sean fella who was like this literally like a wild man. I don't know if he's ever been named. He is insane, but the coolest dude you've ever met at the same time.
Is that right?
So we're just traveling with these guys, and it was just super cool, super fun.
Well, it's one of the things just from, so many people like ourselves were just following your Instagram stories and your posts and everything. And just found it was like you almost had an audience around you the whole time, right? And it looked like not only, like we only have the one stone lifting trip to pull off in Scotland, right? And our experience with it was incredible. You had the stones, you had the history that you got to understand, and you went to these beautiful locations, but you had another couple layers to it than we would have had, because you had David there who had done the research, and then you had all of these locals and people from the community. So it seemed that were there telling you stories, and just to have those generations of the actual history and the past lifters, and it seemed like such a neat opportunity for you.
Yeah, it really was. I keep thinking like it's my fourth stone tour that I've done, and I don't know, I could never possibly top another stone tour like this. Like
Yeah,
I've reached the peak of that mountain, as far as experiences go, and nothing will ever compare to this. And it's not even the stones, it's just the experience that David brought to the whole thing.
yeah.
He really is and I have to give him credit for the whole thing. It's not the stones, it's not the history, it's not the place that you go. Like, he made it worthwhile. He made it, connections with all these other people. And I don't think I could ever top that ever again, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, even just as far as what a great ambassador he is for stone lifters, right? When you have someone like him come to the community, knocking on the doors to ask, well, where to find specific stones, and he's just so genuine and so excited and welcoming and personable. I mean, they would be happy to have more people come if that's a representation of what stone lifters are like, right? I'm sure when David rolls into the community, a lot of these people are probably coming out to say hi just to interact with them. So
Oh,
you
yeah.
guys had some good crowds out there. There was, and I guess maybe we can talk about this stone, and I just want to comment on this one unique interaction that I saw because Dave was talking about these people coming out to witness it, but was at Inishbofin, which I'll turn the mic over to you in a second here because I know that was a special goal for you going there. But there was a moment in one of the videos you took where you've levered this thing up. You get it up on top of that altar, that plinth, and there's two older gentlemen in the background. And the guy gives the other guy a little bit of a pat on the shoulder, and they turn and give each other like the biggest handshake. Like they were so incredibly proud to see this stone lifted up onto the plinth, and like sort of the history of it. Like there was new life breathed into it. They know that for generations and generations to come, that this is going to be something that's going to be continued and sort of reinitiated by you, David. I could just see the two. Like they shared a moment, which was really, really cool to see.
I didn't notice that. I'm gonna have to go back and
Check the
watch that.
video
Yeah,
on
that's
Sean's
really,
Instagram page. If you
really
haven't seen
cool.
it, these two gentlemen are watching him lift, and as soon as he gets it up, they turn to each other, they give each other a huge handshake, and then I think you go over and might have gotten a picture with them, but they were so proud that you had lifted that stone. So it was sort of it was a really magical thing to see, in addition to an incredible lift on your part.
Of course,
So
like all your lifts.
so in Ishboffin, what was it about that stone in particular that was sort of set the target for you when you were going over to lift, dozens of these incredible giant stones?
It's just he had sent me the picture. So I'm down in Florida. I'm visiting my parents, I think, for spring break. And I'm talking to my dad about Ireland and this and that, and we do have some family history, McIlvenna and Dwyer from different parts of Ireland, and how cool it would be to connect with those roots as we're lifting stones. And as I'm talking to my dad, David sends me these pictures from the church and pictures of the stone and the altar, and he's like, hey, I'm leaving at like 3 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, and I'm driving up all the way. I'm catching a ferry. I'm gonna go check out these stones. And I looked at the stones, and he told me the story,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just incredible. Like this, I know the Flag of Den is old.
Yeah,
I just feel like there's some sort of weird history about this one particular stone that
yeah,
just drew me to it more than any other. Like I just became obsessed with this stone, and the fact, like, there's stories that you can read about, and like the people on the islands not believing that men could actually lift the stone until they, there's a story of this woman. I think she's either blind or she's lost her sight. She's really old, and she's like feeling the hands of the men, and she's like, no, you didn't lift it, no, you didn't lift it, no, you didn't lift it. Then she feels this last guy's hands. She's like, yes, you lifted the stone, I know you lifted it.
yeah,
So there's just amazing stories like that, and that was just one stone. It's shaped differently than any other stone.
yeah,
There's a historical aspect. There's a religious aspect. Um, and then when we're there, you're talking about the guy tapping the dude on the shoulder and
yeah,
shaking his hand. The guy who tapped him on the shoulder, that was Sean. So that was our historian for 3 or 4 days of our trip,
yeah.
and
Oh, okay.
he was the greatest ambassador of Irish strength and culture and history. Um, and so he tapped Tommy on the shoulder. And Tommy, who shook his hand and then who shook my hand and gave me a hug, Tommy was the very last person that was able to lift that stone like 30,
Awesome.
35 years ago. So to do
So
it,
35 years, that's amazing.
yeah.
Like
one of
that's
them
my
is,
lifetime ago that someone had lifted that stone, and here you are doing it again.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that one was it was super, super special. That was the one stone that I just really drew me to Ireland. Um,
Just a unique challenge too, just based on the shape and the
Yeah,
way
it's
you lifted it.
wild.
funny story based on the shape. So I'm looking at it, and there's one side, it's shaped like a donut with a hole in the middle. There's one side that's a little bit fatter and heavier than the other side. And Tommy and this other guy, Simon, who had also lifted the stone, they're telling me, they're like, yeah, you got to put the heavy side on the floor or on the ground really far away from your center of gravity, and then you heave it up. And I'm just like,
Hmm.
I don't know about that. but I'll take your word for it because physics, that's not how physics work.
Yeah.
Um, and so David does it that way, gets it a couple inches off the ground. Jacob, my buddy from Scotland, does it that way, gets a few inches off the ground. And then I try it that way and I get it up, maybe 12 or 14 inches. And it's not going anywhere. It's just way too much weight that far away from your hips and your center of gravity. It's never going to happen. And so then I turn it a little bit, try it again, almost get it onto the altar, but I fail miserably. And
Yeah.
so obviously I didn't post these fail videos. I probably should, just so people
No,
realize
man.
how.
I've got a camera full of them, so I just keep those are for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm getting my breath, and Tommy's like, yeah, you got to have it this way. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I got to try it the other way. Like, I know you've listed it before and you're telling me how it's done, but there's something's telling me this is just not the way it's supposed to be lifted. So then I turned it against Tommy's wishes. And I lifted it right onto the altar. So kind of, he ended up, I think he turned to David or Sean, one of the guys afterwards. He's like, oh shit, I'm so sorry. He was so embarrassed. He never came to me and said anything. He was like, that is how I lifted it. I totally forgot. I got it wrong.
Oh, that's all right. Oh, I mean,
Yeah, he was really embarrassed, but he was so happy that we came to lift that stone. And yeah, it was really cool.
well, who knows? I mean, that's one of like the things about stone lifting that creates honest people when they try stones, because the way David lifts a stone, assuming that it's one that's light enough I can also lift, is going to be different than the way I lift it, which is different than the way some of our other friends lift it, right? Like it's depending upon your shape and your size, the length of your levers, right? Like it could be a different challenge for everybody, and you may have to approach it differently. So
It is. Like I know I've mentioned in the past, but our buddy Troy, who's Beard and Boulder on Instagram, him and I would say, are very, very similar levels, but it's almost guaranteed. If I lift a certain stone with my left hand there, he's going to lift it with his right hand there. Like it's just, again, it goes down to your body mechanics, your strengths, your levers and everything. And so it's really neat, because I was thinking when you were saying, you were touching it and you're like, oh man, like I don't think that this is the way to do it. Like it's again, it sounds woo and lame, but like a stone can almost speak to you when you know your body, when you work so hard to train your body and you get your hands on so many stones. Usually when you look at and you get your hands underneath it, you size it up, you just know what is likely going to work for you right off the bat. At least in my experience, you play around with a couple things, but usually pretty quick, it's like, no, I think I've read this right, and here we go.
Yeah, so I've lifted with quite a few different guys and some pretty talented stone lifters, and I would have to agree that everybody kind of has their own way. I don't get how some people, and I'm not trying to like knock anybody, but like some people like look at a stone, and I swear it takes them like 20 or 30 minutes to figure it out. Because I feel like when you're in touch with the stones and you can read a stone, you look at it for a second and you're like, okay, this is how it's going to work. Then you turn it and you put your hands on it and you just kind of give it like a little nudge, and then you're like, okay, that's it. And then it just like, I don't think about, okay, put my hand here or do this there and put my hips here or things like that. Like I kind of feel,
yeah,
just feel comfortable, and then you just go and you just lift it. Like there's not much thinking that goes along with it.
you get your initial read on it, right? And then maybe a few micro adjustments from there, depending upon the balance. But
yeah,
it's almost like pulling the slack out of the bar in a deadlift, right? Like you get that's getting your handles and trying to find that balance point. You go to just pull the slack out of it, so to speak, and then really like right away. But one of the things I also like think is so cool about them as well is the puzzle aspect. It can be one puzzle to lift it onto your lap, and then it could be a different puzzle that you have to shift it to stand with it, and then another puzzle yet again to get it to your shoulder, because everyone is so different. Like I've had to spend time where I'm flipping a stone up almost like 180 degrees in order to get the proper handles, in order to get it from my lap up to my chest or to my shoulder. And I just find that so interesting. It's so much fun, man.
Oh, I honestly hate that.
Oh, really? Oh, I love that. I love it, man.
I want to pick up a stone, I want to put it in my lap, and I want everything to be just the way it's supposed to be.
That's
beautiful, though. And it's like, oh, come on.
No, I love the grind.
Yeah, but that's what's beautiful about it, right? Different people get different things out of the various aspects of stone lifting. And sort of speaking of beautiful, like sort of walk us through what was it like? Like you're getting on a ferry to go across to this ancient derelict church to lift this stone. Like when you're approaching the island, I mean, you must just have absolute butterflies in your stomach in anticipation.
Butterflies or anxiety? I don't know which is
I
worse.
thought they were the same
They're
thing.
pretty similar.
Okay, yeah.
So I definitely had excitement about the stone. I had crazy anxiety thinking about the ferry ride.
Oh yeah.
Oh, really?
So every ferry that David took to all these islands, it seems like on his initial discoveries, he had the absolute worst weather you could possibly imagine. He's like, everybody's throwing up and it's terrible. And like, he's like, I couldn't see anything. You see the ocean, then you see the sky, then you see the ocean. He's like, oh, it was miserable on every single trip. I'm like, oh my God. All right, okay. Because I went on one of the trips in the Faroe Islands. We went to an island called Mykonos, and the ferry ride was pretty brutal. Everybody was throwing up on that ferry as well, and so I already had like in the back of my head how terrible this ride's going to be, and so I had like this anxiety that I'm going to be throwing up, and then I'm going to be too weak to lift a stone, and I have one shot basically to lift it because
Yeah.
you don't get to go again. Um, but it ended up being like the most perfectly beautiful, calm day, and calm over on the Atlantic is like, 10 to 15 foot swells.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it was a pretty nice day. It was beautiful. We get there, it's nothing but sunshine. Um, it was just great. We get to the island, and then Sean starts talking to all these locals, and he's talking to them in Irish. And then he, gets a phone number for some guy, and he calls another dude, and then Tommy shows up in his car, and he picks us up, and half the guys walk to the church, and I rode with my dad, and we went with Tommy, and then these other guys show up, and then Tommy drops us off, and he's talking to us, and then as we're talking, these other random dudes just show up, and they're like, they know Tommy, but they're not even from the islands, and so they end up joining our crew, and they come down to lift the stone, or not lift, but to wash the stone with us, and it's just wild. They all just know each other, and yeah,
They must have loved watching you lift, man. That's so cool.
yeah, they were excited.
So the stone from the short story, the stone, how rad was that to be there? How cool was it? Like having read, I'm obviously you would have read the story beforehand, but did it feel pretty neat walking up? Was it like you described? Was there like, can you please tell me about that? Because I fell in love with that story long before I knew it was even a real stone.
So I had never even heard the full story until after my trip to Ireland, when I listened to David's Blind Boy podcast.
Which was a great
amazing,
podcast.
Yeah. For anyone who hasn't yet, go listen to Blind Boy podcast episode with David on it. It's awesome. What a unique and interesting character.
Oh, man.
Blind Boy is. And then when you pair him with David, like it's magic.
It was magic.
Yeah. But he had I don't know what it was about him, but the way he read that story was just like, I was just blown away. Like, I'm just putting myself in the story, and as he's describing everything, I'm seeing it. So maybe it's kind of a good thing that I actually heard the story after I went there.
Fair enough.
Because as he's reading the story, I can picture every single little rock and every, stone wall, and the water and the stones here, and the people and the villages and things like that. And, passing Liam O'Flaherty's house on the way, walking down the path, and his house is to our left. And then we're going past all these stone walls, and then we reach this little tiny gravel path, and we get down there, and like, I'm talking to Dave, I'm like, how the hell did you find this stone? Like, there's 10,000 stones out here. How did you know this is the one? And you get to like this path, and there's like a 3 foot by 3 foot little area of grass, and there's three stones, in ascending order, kind of like the full circle stones in Iceland. And there's this beautiful pink granite stone, and you just as soon as you see it, that it's the one.
Yeah.
And it's just breathtaking. I think that island and that scenery is definitely my favorites of all the different places we went to in Ireland. That's definitely my favorite place. It's so rugged. Like, there's like, they don't even have soil. Like, David's telling me about how they were growing crops and stuff, and basically they would take the seaweed from the ocean, dry it out, put it on top of their rocks, and then they would grow stuff out. Like, the men there were just incredibly strong and tough.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yes, we get to the stone, and I took bands, and I took pre-workout, and I took ammonia to sniff and stuff like that. And I get there, and it's like, I don't even need any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I think I had been awake for about 36 hours prior to that. And I think I got about 3 hours of sleep the night before.
Yeah.
I do not sleep well on airplanes at all. And then I just had crazy anxiety just for this trip. alone, just thinking about the stones and the travel and different stuff like that. So I was running on fumes, and we get
Body was in
there.
fight or flight mode, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean,
It
literally,
shows
that's
fight though.
Yeah,
Very
it
clearly shows fight because you had an incredible
there's
lift.
no warming up. I mean, you just get to these stones, and it's like, okay, well, it's time to go. It's time to lift these stones, and
Yeah.
I found my handle, and I lifted it up, and I was really surprised. It was a much harder stone than I anticipated.
Yeah.
For its weight, I think it's like 372, 375, something like that.
It's a big stone.
So big, but not insane. Because I'm lifting in the garage when I'm training for Ireland, I'm lifting stones 410 pounds to 430, 440 pounds, and I'm lifting those to my chest. So I'm in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I'll get this. It won't be a problem. It'll be a nice, easy lift. And it was not a nice, easy lift. My pick to the lap was pretty easy, but getting it the full extension all the way up to my neck, it took me a while. It took my breath away. It was a very challenging stone. It's not for the faint of heart.
Wow.
And I'm actually kind of disappointed in myself. Connor Heffernan, the professor from Dublin, he says that in the story, it might be in the story or he read it somewhere else, but essentially you have to kiss that stone 3 times when it gets to your neck to be fully strong. And I had practiced kissing my 410-pound stone in training just so I could do it when I get to Inishmore, and I couldn't do it.
No.
No, I did not succeed. I got it up, and I was just really surprised at how difficult it was to lift the stone all the way to my neck. And so I lifted it up, and I kind of lost my ear for a second, and I didn't even try to give it a kiss. I just put it back down. So I did feel a little bit defeated, even though it was a successful lift. Maybe my standards are a little bit too high, but
Well, no, man. Like again,
it was still magical.
You're lifting on the spot without a proper warm up. Like a gym, your PR in a gym is very different than doing it when you need to at the time. Like you said, you had
No sleep.
no sleep and all that stuff, man. It's a big stone to just lift.
Yeah, it was big. The weight was so far out in front of you. It's kind of like an Atlas stone.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's as close to an Atlas stone as a natural stone could possibly get. But it was a really cool experience. And afterwards, the Sean Urqhart, I know I'm saying his name wrong. He starts reciting. He's telling us all about Liam O'Flaherty and the amazing things that he was writing and the different stories about him. So then he recites this poem from Liam, and he's reciting it in Irish, which I don't speak a lick of Irish. My dad doesn't speak any Irish. And this other gentleman who's a native of the island, he was a principal at the school on the island for like 30 years. He joined us to kind of tell us the history of the island.
Cool.
He's translating the story or the poem to English as Sean is reciting it.
Okay.
And Sean, I should probably post a video of Sean reciting the poem because he is the most animated. If you think David's animated, Sean takes it to a whole nother level.
I would like to see that.
incredible person to listen to and to just watch. So he's telling us this poem by Liam O'Flaherty, and then afterwards we get done and we walk down towards the shore. And in the story, I think it talks about the men that would they would tar their boats.
Yeah.
In the like in the off season, I don't know what part of the year they would do it, but they would tar their boats to like weatherproof them. And if you go down to the
Caracals, I
shore,
believe, right? The boats were called caracals, like a unique shape of boat. Yeah.
Yeah, so they would do that like literally like 50 yards from the stone. So everything that Liam O'Flaherty is writing about in the story is literally right there as you visit the stone.
Amazing.
That's so cool.
And we counted like 20 of these tar spots, and they're still there like 100 years later, and it's literally just the most incredible thing you've ever seen.
Something that's interesting about that story that I've heard a few people talk about it, and there's definitely a lot of people's takeaway is about this old man lamenting his loss of use and loss of strength, and reminiscing about sort of the good old days when he was a young fellow. But actually, my takeaway from that story was actually a story of renewal, because at the very end, after he kind of musters the strength to go down, and sorry, spoilers, everybody, if skip ahead about 30 seconds if you haven't read the story or listened to it. But he tries to lift the stone and he passes away. And as a result of him dying, a number of young kids and people from the community come down to the stone and are talking about how when he was young, he was one of the only people able to lift the stone. And the story ends talking about the school children who came back and revisited the stone and started trying to lift it. So it's almost through his death, there was this renewed interest in the stone, and that sort of the legend and the the culture around that feat of strength was sort of renewed, which was kind of what I took away from it. Which it's a little bit of a is analogous to what David has been doing in Ireland in general, and
It's literally happening right now.
yeah, it's what's happening right now, right? The rebirth, the renewal of historical stone lifting culture in Ireland, and so one of the really incredible historical stones which you had touched on, the Flag of Den.
Yeah.
I mean, I would venture a guess that you may be the only man, if not clearly the only man in recent history to ever lift that thing chest, just based on the weight and the size. Like you could see you were sort of pulling it up, and there was a point you made a readjustment and you were able to press it to your chest and stand with it fully to chest. Like that is
Incredible.
insane. That is insane.
Yeah.
You know, Ohio's strongest kilt is you, so I don't even think you have to do that competition anymore. So
that was a special stone. Yeah, that was the very end of our I think it was it was day 2 of our tour. I had been in Ireland for 3 days at this point, but it was day 2 of our tour. The very, very end. I think we had driven like 500 or 600 kilometers that day, and it was our last stone. And when we went there, so David and Jacob are looking for the stone, and David kind of knew where he had found it last time, but it had been so long he had also forgotten where he found it.
of course,
And the earth had swallowed it up again. Like it was under so much growth, and he thought he had lost it. And so him and Jacob are literally digging in the dirt and going through all these bushes and vines and plants to try to get all this overgrowth out of the way so they could find the stone. And they're doing that, and I'm off with my dad just exploring this old graveyard.
Yeah,
because there's actually multiple stories of this specific graveyard. Really cool history. And so there's the Flag of Den, and there's stories, if a man could get it to his knees on a Sunday, they would lift it. If he could get it to his knees, he was, a really great, strong man. There's a story of a man carrying it around the graveyard itself.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Stories just be stories sometimes.
Because what's the weight of that? Sorry to interrupt.
Just as 500 pounds, I believe. I don't know if it's ever been actually weighed.
I don't know if David officially weighed it.
Fair enough.
But it's easily, I'd say it's easily 440 to 500 pounds, which is a huge estimate. Like people are like,
Yeah, I understand.
Don't estimate the weight. All I can say is it was freaking huge.
Yeah, it was massive. And it looked massive too. So to think somebody could actually carry something with that kind of width, you would have that's.
I believe David had told us there was a story too about somebody picking it up and waltzing it over to the nearest pub.
That's right.
Yeah.
So anyone who wants to try it, David said he's thrown down the gauntlet. This David Keohan had said he'll leave a bottle of whiskey on a stool 100 meters away for anyone who wants to go try. So
I asked him. I couldn't find any pubs nearby.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
There's also stories of, so there's this really old church, and there's literally nothing of this church left except for a couple rocks that are like maybe 2 feet high. Wow. And the church has just been filled in with years of debris and growth and stuff like that. But they had an old altar that they used to use at this church. And the story goes that the men would gather on Sundays and they would pile stones on top of the altar that was on the ground. And then you would stand at one end, kind of like a leverage deadlift kind of thing, like a car deadlift for strongman.
Yeah.
And the goal was to be the strongest man to pick up one end of this altar table, and topple the stones off of it.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So much growth.
Like a wheelbarrow dump kind of thing.
Yeah. Essentially, yeah. But I couldn't find it anywhere. If it's still there, you would need an excavator and some sort of, insanely huge tools, because it's buried underneath
radar to find it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh,
but that's
so cool, man. That's awesome.
That's such a unique idea for a feat of strength that it has to be real.
Yeah.
Right. Like who would make that up? That's such an obscure thing. They would just say, "Oh, well, it's another stone to lift," but that's a very specific task. So not so cool.
So he's looking for the actual lifting stone, and the only one I'm concerned about is that one, because that's like so different than anything we've ever seen before. Sure. I didn't even care about the other one.
Yeah.
So he's digging through, and I'm looking through with my dad, and we found one of them, but
Yeah, no, that's wow. That's really, really cool. That's
We'll go
fascinating.
back again with a shovel.
That's right. Yeah.
Right on. Well, is there any other? I don't want to keep you all night, but I really, really want to talk to you about the Faroe Islands. But before we jump to the Faroe Islands, is there any other experiences, lifts, stones, like anything you want to mention about Ireland before we switch gears?
Um,
I'm sure we could. Sure, there'd be a lot more, but it's hard. Hard to
I
discuss.
would like to say that what David has done is just incredible.
Yeah.
And then also, I think people need to kind of understand and realize how insanely huge these Irish stones are.
Yeah.
Um, so like lifting all the stones in Iceland, you have the full Sturker stones, and some of the full Sturker stones, don't get me wrong, some of them are huge. They get up to 400 pounds, but most of them are in the 340 range. I want to say every single one of these stones that we lifted in Ireland, except for maybe one or two, all surpass the full Sturker stones in Iceland.
Oh, yeah.
Because people kind of put Iceland as like the pinnacle. That's the highest you could possibly be as far as stone tours and strength feats go. And now that I've been to Ireland, I don't think that's the case. I think, or yeah, now that I've been to Ireland, I don't think that's the case for Iceland anymore.
Yeah.
I think, when more people realize how insanely huge these stones are in Ireland, they're going to realize that Iceland is more than capable, by
Yeah.
everybody. And these Ireland stones are really, really the challenge if you're into it.
I think it's cool that now, really, as these sort of, these collections of historical stones are becoming more readily accessible to the public, you can almost, if you're getting into stone lifting or you want to get out and start doing some stone tours, like there's a tier system now, right? In Scotland, you're lifting stones
Oh, yeah.
that were, manhood stones or test of strength for youth, for the most part, right? There's some massive stones there as well.
Yes.
In Iceland, you're testing yourselves against, the strongest of the men in a given community. In Ireland, you're testing yourself against the strongest man, right? Those were stones. All those stones. The stories is tied to them being lifted by the strongest person in the parish or the region, right? So that's your sort of, you can have a tiered approach to how you're testing yourself against the physical capabilities of these historical people. So
And into the myths with Ireland too.
yeah, absolutely.
It's almost like, you have different levels of stones. You have, the full Sturker stones, then you have the legend stones. And
Right.
these are more almost, they're legend stones, but I think they're manageable
Right.
and they're liftable.
Yeah.
So I do think they're, a notch above. And there were stones in the Faroe Islands that were, they had the women's lifting stones, and then they had, men's lifting stones. And then they also had insanely huge 800-pound legend stones that obviously nobody ever lifted.
Right.
I think the legend stones in Ireland, I do think they were lifted by people. I
Yeah.
think it was legit.
That's awesome. By the way, your dad must have liked that Scottish trip you guys went on, because he joined you in Ireland, which is such a cool thing to see. That video
Oh,
when
yeah.
you're lifting the stone and he's having some coffee beside you, like that's a t-shirt. That's awesome.
Well, so I guess there's I don't watch the news a whole lot, but I guess there's like a Sunday news somewhere in the like a national news here in the States. And the guy who hosts one of the shows on the news channel, he sells those mugs, and I guess his thing is, you take the mugs and you travel,
Oh,
and then you send your story in, and then you try to get it posted. So that was his goal. He's trying to get that to take some pictures with it and get it posted for the national news.
That's awesome.
That's so cool.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't mind, maybe talk a little bit about the Faroe Islands, because my understanding is you did most, if not all, of the research and put all of that out there onto the Old Man of the Stones. Is now, am I right that those stones are on there because of your work, your effort, your trip? Is that correct?
Not entirely myself. I can't take full credit for that.
Sure.
Well, so when we first started researching the Faroe Island stones, Nick Whalen had gone to the Faroe Islands
Okay.
years and years ago. He went probably like 5 years ago, maybe something like that. But he went during that time. He got really, really bad luck, and it snowed the entire time he was there, so he hardly got to lift any stones. And so there's some stones that he knew about that he couldn't find, and some of the stones that he did find were so huge he couldn't lift them. And so I want to say he's the first American
Okay.
that's ever gone to the Faroe Islands and done any type of research. So I can't take full credit for
No,
that.
sure, that's fair.
To Nick. That's
Yeah, big shout out to Nick, no doubt.
Yeah, we had plans to go there, him, Ryan, and Nick and I. And those plans, I think because of COVID, they had much stricter rules and laws getting into the country than Iceland did. So we ended up switching our trip to Iceland. That's when I went with Ryan the first time. But I just became really fascinated with the stones in the Faroe Islands, and so excuse me. I want to say when we first started, there was like 8 stones, maybe 6 stones that we kind of knew about. We knew of them. We hardly even know where they were. They would just be like, "Oh, there's, Olaf Sturka. It's on a trail." Well, the trail's like 5 miles long, and they'll be like, "It's between this village and this village," and the trail isn't marked. You just walk from cairn to cairn, and hopefully you find the stone if you're lucky. Um, and so the research kind of started like that, and we knew that there was a guy named Bjorkfinner Nielsen, and he was a teacher and an author from the Faroe Islands, and he had written for a magazine, like a national magazine in the Faroes called Mondal, back in the mid to late 80s, and he would publish stories about these stones. And in the magazine, it's a small enough country that he would, at the end of it, he would be like, "Hey, does anybody know anything about any other feats of strength? Please write into me. I'm going to publish more." And so there's all these series of magazines that got published, and you can't find them anywhere online. And so I researched him. I found Bjorkfinner. I messaged him. He had no interest in talking to me. Unfortunately, I think he's getting pretty old and his health was declining.
Yeah.
And so he just basically said, he's like, "I'm really sorry. I can't meet with you. I can't talk with you really about this stuff. Good luck to you."
Yeah.
And so then I found um, his articles. I actually contacted the National Archives in the Faroe Islands, just thinking, what the hell? I might as well reach out. I have nowhere to go. I have no leads. I'm just, I'm navigating blind at this point. So I reach out to them, and they sent me almost every copy that he had written in like a PDF.
Oh, great.
Like, oh my God,
Unreal.
this is amazing. So I find them and I'm reading through. And if you know anything about the Faroe Islands, the language is very, very old. It's like, I want to say it's like one of the oldest languages you could get, as close to, what the Vikings would have spoken 1,000 years ago. Very little influence from outside, countries and cultures.
And actually, would you mind, because assuming that a lot of people who are listening don't know about the Faroe Islands, can you give people just sort of a brief history on, they're north of Scotland and sort of what their significance was in history?
So the Faroe Islands, it's self-governing, but it's not. It's a property of Denmark.
Yeah.
So if you fly straight out of Denmark, out of Copenhagen, and you go west, it is about halfway between Denmark and Iceland. And it's this tiny, tiny, tiny little nation in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And if you didn't know it was there, you would pass it before you even realized what the hell you're looking at.
Yeah.
It is super small. Like I think they want to say there's like 13 main islands, and you can drive between the islands. They have incredible tunnels. You drive. They have these tunnels, these undersea tunnels, and they're like 15 miles long, and they have roundabouts inside the tunnels, and
What?
you can drive from the most northern part of the country to the southern part in like an hour. So it's really small.
That is wild.
And it's take a mix, like it's the Highlands of Scotland and the wild, Vikingness or whatever you want to call it of Iceland, and you kind of put them together, and that's what you get. And so I want to say they were first inhabited, either I can't remember correctly. I'm probably wrong. It's been a while since I researched Faroe Islands, but they were first inhabited either by the Irish or the Scottish,
Oh, okay.
like missionaries. And then they kind of left, and then the Vikings came and inhabited the islands. And there's a lot of stories dating back to like 900 1000 AD, and that's when kind of Christianity came over, and they got rid of all the paganism and things like that. So it's one of the most beautiful countries you could ever possibly imagine.
Your photos were
incredible.
incredible, by the way, man. Like, absolutely, because you'd mentioned the start you're interested in photography. I also am pretty big into it myself, and so I really appreciated all the photos that you post. They're just beautiful.
It kind of sucks though, because you take these photos and you're like, God damn, this looks nothing like what I'm seeing with my own eyes.
Right.
Fair enough.
You almost don't want to post a photo,
Yeah,
because it doesn't do it justice.
sure.
And if I'm not mistaken, so were the Faroe Islands in in many cases, like a staging ground for Vikings as they were preparing for raids into Great Britain?
Could be. I don't know. It seems if they were, it almost seems out of the way for them.
Okay, yeah, we'll cut
Because I
that
would
part.
think the Faroes, it's a bit northwest
Okay,
of
yeah.
Scotland. I would think they would stop in the Hebrides,
Right, the
Northern Isles.
Hebrides or what is that?
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, there's nothing there. Like they hardly have any agriculture. They can hardly grow anything. They just
yeah.
have, they have their sheep. There's more sheep than humans that live on the islands. It's incredible. And they live off the land. They still do things subsistence type living that dates
Wow.
back 1,000 years.
Amazing.
That's so cool.
Really, really cool. And one thing that I found really interesting about the Faroe Islands is it seemed like a lot of the lifts were what were called the have lift, as opposed
Oh
to
yeah.
standing or shouldering with it. Would you mind letting people that may not know what a have lift is, maybe a little bit about that and the type of stones they have there?
So traditionally they have they have three sets of stones. They have the Kanu have, which is the milkmaid stone, which is generally smaller. And when I say smaller, it can weigh anywhere from 300 to 600 pounds.
Oh my
What?
gosh.
Because there is a milkmaid stone that weighs over 600. I kind of feel that was a legend and she didn't actually lift it. But there are milkmaid stones. And essentially, the have lift is a stone is propped up on top of two other stones, usually two other stones. You straddle the stone with your legs. You kind of find a balance point. You put your hands underneath and you just pick the stone off the ground. And as long as it comes about an inch to a couple inches off the ground, it counts as a full lift, which I think is amazing because then you can lift hundreds and hundreds of pounds more than you ever normally could for a full lift. And you could do it all day long and not get tired.
Right.
Yeah. So they
The
have
milk
the
is
milk.
really fresh because she can lift the cow and bring it to your door. If she can pick up a 600-pound stone.
That's wild, man.
Well, so the women they would go up into the outfields, up into the mountains, and they would go with the cattle, and they would milk the cattle, and they would carry on their shoulders, the giant jugs filled with milk.
Right,
They had to
yeah,
carry
yeah.
that down from the mountain back into the village, and they had to be strong enough to do that. So they would test the women.
Wow.
To get that kind of job. And I can honestly say that climbing those mountains to get to the stones was insane. It was brutal. I've never felt so unprepared in my entire life for stones because you're climbing 500, 600, up to 800 meters up these hills to get to some of these stones, and it might take you an hour to 2 hours of hiking just straight up a mountain to get there. And by the time you get there, you're so exhausted you don't even want to lift it.
Yeah.
That's tough work, man.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, they had those, and then they had the men's stones. I found the men's stones weren't like a test. So the women's, they would test to see if they could be the milkmaids. The men really was not like that. The men's stones were were feats of strength that were kind of performed one time and one time only. So like the women would lift their stones for testing. The men, it was more of a lifted stone instead of a lifting stone.
Right.
Okay.
So it'd be like, some man, Olaf Sturka, he wants to be remembered for all time. So he would lift this one stone one time only. And so that stone then became named after him. And there was a lot of stones like that in the Faroe Islands where one guy lifted it and it was forever remembered as like his stone.
Way to immortalize themselves. Really.
Yeah, no doubt. That's really, really interesting. That is
so a
cool.
lot of the stones were like that.
And so you went and lifted Olaf's stone. So now you got to change the name because it's been lifted by two men.
I couldn't lift that
You
one.
learned his dream. Oh, okay, there you go.
It was I think I hiked for like, God, I don't know. I hiked up this mountain and across this plateau for like a good 2 hours with my parents, and then this fog sets in, and my GPS was acting up, and I couldn't really locate the stone. And so I'm just wandering around in the mountains in this fog, and you couldn't see more than 100 feet in front of you. And I finally found the stone. And, maybe if I was like super fresh, I could have lifted it. But by this point in the day, I was too tired and it was just not going to happen. I did not give it my full effort.
Yeah.
So that's one on my bucket list I did not get to lift.
Can't win them all. And
Yeah.
one thing that I thought was kind of cool, and if I'm misremembering this, please let me know, but we were chatting before you actually went there, and you had mentioned that you kind of got an idea of a bunch of the weights, but everyone was referring to them in puns, and you just thought that was the word that they called pounds, but you realize afterwards it's a slightly different measurement, so everything was much heavier than you'd anticipated.
Yeah, so kind of like kilos, I think kilos is 1 kilo is 2.2 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A pound, or however you say it, I didn't even realize this is a real thing until a couple weeks before my trip. Is I think it's like 1.1 or something. So it's not even that big of a deal. But if you have a 500-pound stone,
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
10% more weight to that stone, it adds up pretty fast when you're already reaching your limits for what you can possibly lift.
Yeah.
No kidding. Think of how hard people work for 10% more in their deadlift or something like that, for you just to be like, oh shit, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to lift
the conversion factor I didn't take into account.
You live and you learn.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. And so that's one thing I'd love to talk to you about. And I'll preface it with please don't say anything you don't feel comfortable sharing, because you work so hard for all your research. And that's one of the many things I admire about you, Sean. But just you're obviously an incredible stone lifter, super passionate, but you are an extraordinary researcher, and you give so much of your time for this passion. And I find that process fascinating, and I find it amazing. So what is it that you think that, drives you to research so hard? And how long does it take you for these kind of things? Or is it luck of the draw with certain places? Or if you could just expand on whatever you're comfortable with expanding on about your research process and how it actually makes you feel when you research it and you go to a place and you lift those stones.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I want to say the research part it's kind of like treasure hunting. Just you kind of you get this idea in your head and you kind of start searching and you find a clue, and then you go off into like a tangent on that clue, and then you go different directions, and before you know it, you have 100 tabs open on your computer, and I have no idea where I've even gone. I just have a million things open and I'm researching, and you might have a million tabs open and you find one stone.
Right.
Or you could exit everything out and you find nothing and you just wasted 10 hours and you literally came away with nothing.
Sure.
So it's a long process. One of the biggest things, one of the best things that I could ever recommend somebody to do to research stones is to reach out to other people. When I was researching the stones in the Faroe Islands, nothing that I did was on my own.
Yeah.
Those people in the Faroe Islands, single-handedly, they are the ones that made my trip.
Cool.
They get all the credit, because I would have gone to the Faroe Islands and lifted 10 stones. I met a guy named Einar Vang. I met him through social media, and so it's kind of stalkerish, and it sounds really weird.
I like this.
There's a confession coming here.
When you have a passion like this, it's kind of insane to begin with.
Yeah.
So like I would know that there's a stone in an area. I wouldn't know anything about the stone. I would just say, hey, there's a lifting stone in this area. And so I would go on to like Instagram, and I would look at hashtags, or you can look at locations, and I would look at pictures in that area to see, can I see anything that looks like a lifting stone? Or, is somebody posting multiple pictures and tagging that location? Because that means they probably live there.
Yeah.
So then I would reach out to these people and I'd be like, hey, I'm this weird guy from America. I'm researching stones, and I think there's a stone in the village that you've posted these pictures at. Can you talk to me? And I want to say 80% of the time I get no response.
Yeah.
But that 20%, 10%, whatever, that somebody responds to me, it's like it just opens up the floodgates. So Einar was the first person that I was able to get in contact to help me in the Faroe Islands. And our friendship for probably a good year or two, we would correspond through email, kind of like pen pals, and I would find some information, and I would send him these articles, and he would translate the entire article for me into Faroese, because there is no translator. Which
no translator.
I'm sure it took him forever.
Wow.
So he would do that, and then we would talk about it, and then I'd be like, okay, well, there's a stone in this area. And he'd be like, okay, well, I live 30 minutes from there. I'll go there this weekend with my wife, and we'll hike up the mountain, and we'll find that stone for you.
What a guy.
And this happened multiple times. There was a woman, her name was Bara. And I met her for dinner with her family and ate dinner at her house in the Faroe Islands with my family, and they had a home cooked meal. She was a farmer from the Faroe Islands, her and her husband. And I'm like, hey, there's this stone in the village where you live. Can you tell me about this stone? And she's like, oh yeah, that's my great great uncle lifted that stone, you know, and I can tell you all about it. It's on my property. You have permission to go lift it. I'm like, well, what about this other stone? She's like, oh yeah, my best friend, her brother lives in that house and that's their stone. And so like all these connections started happening. And if I didn't reach out to these people, I'd be lost. Like honestly, the Faroe Islands would not have happened.
It's such a
Um,
grassroots effort. Yeah.
it was so weird. There was one stone. I messaged this guy and I told him about the stone. He's like, oh yeah, I know about this stone. And I'm like, so I sent him a picture of it, and there's this girl. I took a screenshot from a YouTube video, and I sent him this picture. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's my niece. That was about 20 years ago.
Hmm.
That's my niece." I'm like,
Right.
"What?" And so then he sends me a photo like 5 minutes later of him sitting on the same stone from like 1975.
Oh, cool.
He's like, "I know this stone." He's like, "Here's the location. Here's all these other stones," and like it's just the most wild thing. The people in the Faroe Islands were the nicest, most kind, most helpful people you could ever possibly imagine.
That's
So, as far as research goes, I mean, there's ways to go about your research, but you reaching out to the people of that country and of those, the villages and the towns and stuff where the stones are, that is the absolute best thing that you could possibly do.
Sean the Stone Stalker. I think there's a new Instagram handle in there somewhere. I will workshop it a bit.
I'm a stone stalker.
So, out of curiosity, Sean, it seems like obviously as we're watching all of David's research unfold, that the people of Ireland, or at least from the outside looking in, it seems like people are really fascinated by this history of theirs that seemed to be a bit lost. Did you find kind of a similar thing with the Faroe Islands? Like as you're digging deep into the history there, did people know about this and not care, or were they unaware? What was that like?
A lot of them did not know about it, and the ones that found out about it when I was there had no interest in it.
Okay,
Interesting.
It's just not a part of their culture anymore.
sure.
It's gone. Which is weird because they have some of their stones are like they have like monuments for their stones. Like in their capital, they have a statue of a guy who's carrying a stone.
Oh, wow.
You know, they have a museum on one of their islands, and it's like a wax museum. And inside their wax museum, they have another guy lifting a stone. So it was a major part of their culture
No kidding.
because they've completely forgotten about.
And
Um,
sorry if I missed this.
Young people
You
don't
mentioned it already, but what was kind of the age of some of these stones? Like when was this stone lifting period in their culture?
Oh, it was hundreds of years ago.
Okay,
Yeah,
similar to Iceland then, that kind of era.
yeah.
Okay,
I'd say about the same thing. I think like the Olaf Sturka. I want to say that dates back to the 16 or 1700s.
cool, very
Um,
cool.
there was one stone in an area called Brinjamanaboard, and it was basically there was a battle that was going to take place there between the pagans and the Christians, and the bishop he said to his army, I only want you fighting for me. You can only fight for me in this battle if you can lift this stone, as the
Wow.
story goes.
I love that
And
stuff.
one man lifted the stone because it was so big, and then their army got slaughtered.
No way.
And this
You are
is from
not
like,
prepared. Yeah.
this is like 1000 AD, like
Holy
literally like
really?
1,000 years
And so that stone was still there. Sorry.
No, no.
ago.
What's
It's
there?
debatable if it's the real one or not.
Yeah. Did you lift
There's some
it?
articles on
Is it
it.
two-man army now? I guess so.
Too big for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Something you mentioned earlier.
Supposedly, somebody took the stone and put it in their garden.
No.
Supposedly,
Ah.
so I don't know if that's the real one or not.
Something you touched on earlier, it sort of said, even when going to Ireland, the sort of drive for you was more so about the physical test presented by the stones rather than the historical aspect of it. Is that similar to Fair? Like, is your sort of passion and drive for finding these new stones to find a new physical test for yourself in a location that can become a travel destination?
Um, I think definitely that's a part of it. As you keep getting stronger and you keep getting more experience lifting these stones, you want something that's going to be more and more challenging and more difficult for you.
Yeah.
And eventually there's going to come a point where you've lifted all the stones, or you've reached a point where this or that or whatever. But I actually think when I reflect on it now, I kind of think the history and the culture and the people and the travel experience is more important to me now than lifting the stones.
Right.
Because I'm looking, Sweden's a very big possibility for me going to next year. That's something I might go to next year. The history's there. There's 100, 200 stones in Sweden, but they don't have the stories like Ireland has. They don't have the stories like Iceland or the Faroe Islands has. And so for me to go there and lift these stones, even if I lift 50 of them in one trip, it's not going to be fulfilling.
Right.
Because I'm just not going to get that same experience that I got with David in Ireland or with the Faroe Islands.
Right. Yeah. No, that's totally fair. I think. Oh, go ahead.
No.
In talking about pushing yourself to always be able to lift bigger, better stones, like you're clearly, you're world class when it comes to stone lifting. So we were hoping we could take the opportunity to sort of pick your brains about your training methods. Are there things you're doing to, supplement your training other than just picking up bigger stones to allow you to achieve, absolutely incredible feats of strength?
Beer and whiskey.
Yeah. We're on the same training plan then. It hasn't worked for me as well as you yet, so I don't know. You have to send me some notes.
So I've trained the same way for a really long time, which is kind of like a conjugate. Some people might call it like a West Side type of training program. And I did stuff like that when I was training for the Highland Games. 2 upper, 2 lower, 2 upper body days, 2 lower body days, a speed day, a heavy day, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, and then with accessories. When I started stone training, I kept the same kind of routine, but I just kind of changed the way that I did things. And I started incorporating stones into my training. So I don't have I don't have a stone day per se. And I probably do very little stone training, to be honest, compared to some other lifters. I know there's some guys out there who train almost exclusively with stones. I don't consider myself a naturally strong person. I was never gifted that way. I didn't even weigh 100 pounds until I was, 14 years old. So I was never a big person.
Same idea as me, man. Yeah. I'm not big now, but I was always really, really tiny.
Yeah, I think when I was born, my mom would tell me stories when I was born that I had to wear Cabbage Patch Kid clothes. The dog was so small.
It's a sweet bird.
So yeah, I kind of follow the same split as that.
Okay.
It's kind of like powerlifting essentially, but I choose my exercises based on what I think is going to carry over to stone lifting. So if I had to choose, for lower body, it's always going to be some type of glute ham raise at the very beginning of my workout. It's going to be a box squat of some sort. And then it's going to be good mornings. And then I lift stones almost always as my last or second to last exercise after I've done everything else. And I don't like the feeling of lifting stones without being warmed up.
Yeah.
A stone tour is different because you don't have a choice. But when I'm in the garage and I lift a stone and I'm cold, I hate the feeling of it. It feels terrible.
Sure.
And the other thinking is by lifting a stone after I've already been fatigued from training for about 45 minutes to an hour, it's going to mimic whatever fatigue I might face on a stone tour. You're on that 3rd, 4th, 5th day, you're lifting your 15th or 20th or 30th stone. You're kind of mimic that fatigue a little bit. So yeah, for lower body, always some type of box squat, always some type of good morning, lots of glute ham raises for the hamstrings, lots of direct glute work. And for both lower body days, I think I deadlift like once a year, once every 2 years. I don't think that carries over to my stone lifting at all. For upper body, I still do the typical powerlifting type stuff, but it's a lot of upper back work and a lot of rows, just rows of every kind, just tons and tons and tons of rows. And I think if I had to pick, maybe 5 exercises, if I had to choose the 5 most important exercises for stones, it would be a box squat, a good morning, some sort of direct glute or hamstring work, and rows. Well, that's only 4. 5. I can't.
Some kind of grip.
You get my drift.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think something I played with this off season was I wanted to. I got to the point where I could pick a heavier stone. Well, initially I could lift a heavier stone than I could pick. And so then I was training my pick. My pick got better, and then my stand up wasn't as good, and vice versa. Like, it kept going back and forth.
Yeah.
So one thing I played with this off season was I split it up into each day had one. So like one day I'd be focusing on the pick. So I'd do like really, really heavy picks with either plates or a stone or a sandbag. And then the other day I'd just do really heavy extensions with the sandbag. And my thinking was they would come together and my stones would just be insanely strong. And I think it worked a little bit, but to be honest, it didn't have as much of a carryover as I thought it would. I think lifting stones is really just the way you should go. I don't think splitting up the movement into parts like that has as much of a carryover as you would think. So really getting as strong as you possibly can in the lower body, in the back, the lower back, the upper back, the hamstrings, the glutes, those muscle groups, getting those as strong as you possibly can. And then refining your technique with stone lifting, I think, is really the way to go.
Yeah, and I love talking about this stuff, and it's just so fascinating because I don't want to say that there's a lot of ways to get strong, right? There's a lot of types of strength and a lot of ways to get strong for a particular focus. And a lot of people seem to feel, doing a ton of barbell work and you're training the muscles, not necessarily the movements, in order to get strong for stones. And then, our buddy Troy, who's very, very strong, he does nothing but boxing and lifting stones. And he's very, very strong. And I almost find myself somewhere in the middle because I find, especially I'm not a big guy. And so in order to compete against big guys, in the competitions, is you have to get you have to be an expert at specific movements, right? And there's no way to get really, really good at specific movements unless you do that specific movement. Yeah. And we've talked about it before, at least think we have, but if not, there's a certain amount of time under tension that comes when you're training with a stone that you don't get with a barbell or dumbbell, right? And reflecting on I never did a whole lot of shoulder, for instance, I never did a lot of shouldering training, and I jumped from a decent shoulder to what I think is a pretty reasonable shoulder pretty quick.
Reasonable is an understatement, Dave.
Yeah. Well, okay, thank you. But the point is I don't think I actually got any stronger, but what I did is I got better at the discomfort, right? So once I got comfortable with a shit ton of weight on my chest and I knew that I could breathe, I knew I didn't have to panic. You could actually rest into the exercise and know you were fine. I kind of leveled up really quickly. So I think that's a really neat element of training that maybe people don't consider too much is it's not just the movement. It's not just training the muscles. You actually have to train to be uncomfortable because as much as we love this, and this is probably a huge part of why it's so damn satisfying, is when you're done is because it's very, very hard and very, very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said there. Yeah.
How could you even train for something like stone shoulder in the gym? There's no way to replicate that without actually doing it. And
sure, fair.
To your point, teaching your body not to panic and freak out and that you're going to be okay, that this is something that you can, you can hold that weight, assuming you can hold the weight, but you don't have to ditch and panic. It's definitely something that, I'm working on that too. I know that I think when David, you were training under a program that Ryan Stewart had given you was the stone wrestling. Not even attempting to, you're picking it to your lap and not even attempting to stand with it until you've wrestled it and rolled it and hugged it while you have it on your lap for 30 seconds to a minute. Well, you're training for that discomfort, right? You're training to be able to push through that. So
yeah, you gotta embrace the suck.
Well, you have to enjoy it.
Pain cave and stay there. Get cozy.
There's a whole lot of people out there that are not willing to go through that. Because it's not fun. It hurts and it's painful and you're left bruised and bloody and it can bruise your ego.
Sure. And
it is a very difficult activity. It's not like a barbell. Barbell, you can pretty much figure out and do stuff and whatever. You can move it around. But yeah, you're talking about standing there with a 385-pound stone on your chest. I can honestly say I have no desire to do that. That sounds absolutely horrible.
I love it, man. I love it.
I love lifting a stone to my chest and then putting it down.
Yeah, well, that's fair. And that's why I hate carries, man. We're hoping to go to Iceland next year, and the Husafell is going to be something I'd love to do. But That's what I hate. I hate carries, man. Like I'm not a big guy, and so like we were talking about this, some guys at work today trying to explain like this weird stuff that we do, and like I'm like, yeah, I want to go and carry this stone. It's 410 pounds, and I was like, that's actually kind of like having a black bear on your chest. Like you literally have to be able to move with the weight of like a smaller black bear on your body. Like it's just a weird thing that we love to do.
I think if you put a black bear on your back, it'd probably be easier to carry that than the freaking Husafell.
I believe that entirely. And, that's one thing I just want to make sure, I don't want to skip over this, just to make sure that everyone knows how much work you also did for Iceland too. So a lot of the stones, from my understanding, that are there, you also did some work in researching that with Ryan. And was that also Nick Whalen too?
Nick Whalen, he is the guy, I think, when it comes to Icelandic stones. I want to say he's been there probably 4 times now.
Right on.
He actually just went a few weeks ago this summer and lifted a couple more stones that we missed.
Awesome.
One somehow we never even found in our research. Another one was at a museum up north. And we had reached out to this museum about the stone, and they told us, "Oh no, we haven't seen that stone in decades. That stone's been long gone. It's lost." And so we drove right past that museum and didn't stop there. Well, Nick didn't believe them. I guess he's kind of stubborn that way. He didn't believe them, and he went there, and he's like, "I don't know what these guys are talking about, because the stone is sitting directly out front of the
man,
museum,
come on.
and it's labeled, and there's a weight that's been spray painted on the stone." And it's a really cool stone. There's stories, and there's an article about it and pictures dating back, 100 years or so. Yeah, as far as research goes, Nick is like the guy. He can find a stone in Iceland. You just say, there's a stone under this mountain, which sounds ridiculous because a lot of the research in Iceland, that's the only clues you get. They'll say power stones by the road under this mountain. And so you're looking on these maps for a road that existed 200 years ago underneath some mountain. Now, mind you, there's like 5 or 10 mountains in Iceland that all have the same name, and it's pretty common. And so he will go there, and he will find these stones that you never ever could possibly imagine. So yeah, as far as finding stones in Iceland, I can only take partial credit. Ryan, another guy, Jacob from Scotland, he's done a whole lot of research on Iceland, but Nick Whalen is the guy when it comes to researching Icelandic stones.
Right on. Well, I think it's important that everyone involved gets the credit, because the stuff you do, I mean, it helps grow this passion for a lot of people. And if anyone else goes and lifts on your hard work, then they should know the guys who found them.
It makes it accessible. And maybe just to sort of circle back to something that David had mentioned before, is the Old Man of the Stone. So for anyone who's not aware, there is a web page called Old Man of the Stones that has a map. It's essentially like a Google map that has pin drops and even little sort of info tags for various historical stones around the world. So if you're ever looking to map out a stone tour, jump on that website, and you can plot out and figure out where you want to go and what stones you want to lift, and do your own research that way. So
one thing to note when you go there and you're researching the Icelandic stones, supposedly a couple of the pin drops are not correct.
A bit of a gamble there. There's excitement.
It's a little bit. So like Brynjolfstak. Apparently Brynjolfstak is off by a little bit.
Okay.
And Jamie Gorian really struggled. He said he searched for like an hour or two to find Brynjolfstak. I don't know how he missed. There's only one road in and one road out, and it's on one side of the road, and it's hard to miss it. It's the only stone in the area on a beach. But he said that the pin was off.
Okay.
And then there's another stone, Jacob from Scotland. He was searching for the stone that Nick had found a few years ago called Hakadalr, and I had pinned it, and apparently my GPS was off when I pinned it, and he ended up in some F road way up in a mountain, like miles past the stone, and completely missed it. So
that's a beautiful place to drive, though.
Iceland, do research and make sure everything is set before you get there, because the last thing you want is to be looking for a stone in Iceland where there is absolutely zero phone service.
Yeah.
And you're in the wrong spot.
Yeah, that's good insight.
Yeah.
I kind of took us off track there when I brought up Iceland, but I just do want to mention that you, just back to the training thing, is that you had written an article as well, because I have a lot of people reach out to me randomly just asking, questions about stone training and what carries over and that kind of stuff. And you've actually written an article that would help a lot of these people.
Yeah. So it's kind of just, it wasn't even like a program per se. It was just my ideas and how I like to organize things and plan things out so that somebody could read it, kind of like a template,
Sure.
and they could write their own program based on their strengths or whatever equipment they have available to them. I actually just recently got done writing another article for stonelifting.org, and it's specific just to my preparations that I made in the last like 10 weeks, my prep for Ireland, and it's exactly what I did for Ireland. Why I did things a certain way, whether it was intensity or volume or stones or weights and exercises and different things like that. So it's a little bit different than what I've done in the past for any of my other stone preps. I actually wrote out a plan and stuck to it.
Yeah, I
A lot
find
of
that
times
hard
I'll
for
get started
myself.
on it.
Yeah,
You kind of get carried away a little bit and you change things based on how you're feeling that day. But I actually wrote a program and I stuck to it, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons I was so successful this time in Ireland.
Yeah.
Is it was very methodical and it was very planned out, and I stuck to it. Um, and it's 4 days a week. It goes into great detail. I'm one of the things that was different about my Ireland trip is because I knew that the stone volume that I was going to be lifting was going to be so much lower than my previous trips. I think my last two trips to Iceland and the Faroe Islands, I did over 30 stones.
Cool.
This one, I was thinking I was going to get to about 20, and I only got to, I think, 16. So I knew that I did not have to have my work capacity did not have to be as high, specific to stones for my Ireland trip. And so I actually decreased the amount of stones that I was lifting in training to allow me to lift heavier stones because I needed my max strength to be higher for the stones that I was lifting in Ireland. So I was
Yeah.
driving my work capacity through different things like the weights and the exercises and the sets and the reps and stuff like that. And I was letting my stones be more of like a max effort type stuff.
Right.
And I think it did make a big difference in my performance in Ireland. I will say I think I did well in Ireland, but I've never felt so beat up in my entire life after
Yeah.
a stone
Fair.
tour.
A lot
My
of
my
cumulative weight.
quads,
Yeah.
my hamstrings, or not my hamstrings, my quads and my biceps were black and blue and they were bruised. My arms were tore up and shredded. Every time I lifted a stone, I was bleeding. My legs literally felt like they were just going to give out towards the end of the trip. Like I think I lifted one of the stones in the cemetery, and I think it was David said he doesn't think any person has ever lifted the stone as high, even in the story of the guy who lifted the stone. And if you see me, like if you watch me in the video, I lifted all over my chest and I put it down and I just kind of like collapsed over the wall
Mm.
behind me. And I was just like, I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I was literally just so exhausted by that
Yeah.
point in the trip because all the stones were so heavy and we were hitting them with so much frequency. I was dead. I've been back for, I think, 2 weeks now and I still haven't touched a weight.
yeah, fair enough. Your
Clearly,
nervous
your
system.
preparation was great, though. Where can people find that initial article?
Stonelifting.org.
Okay.
It's on
Both
the
on there.
website.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So David Brown, he put that out. And then, I'm not sure when the Ireland article is going to be released. I kind of sent him like my rough draft or whatever, my ideas. And then he puts everything together and makes it more, reader friendly.
Awesome.
So hopefully that'll come out,
And,
in the near future.
and where can people find you online? So for people who want to go back through the archives and see the cool trips you've done, look at the footage and the posts from your recent trip to Ireland, and then watch as you go on future stone adventures, possibly to Sweden next year. Where can people
Yeah.
find you?
I'm on Instagram mostly. It's Sean Sean Urq Urq, all one word. So Sean Urq, and that's short for Sean Urqhart. Um, and I do most of my stuff on Instagram. I'm on Facebook as well, but I really hate Facebook. I don't know who's who on Facebook, so I got about 300 friend requests, and I just ignore them completely. I have
Fair.
no desire for Facebook at all.
Same, man.
Yeah.
So,
Well, as we wrap things up here, is there any last things you want to say? Do you have any big events or anything you're looking forward to coming up?
One thing that we have coming up is the Columbus Oktoberfest. I'm the co-AD for this. It's a German festival in Columbus, Ohio in September. And it's half strongman, half stone lifting. And we finish every event every year with the Steinheben, which is a massive 500-pound stone, basically a Ukrainian deadlift for maximum distance or maximum height.
yeah, live
And
from
we
the
finish it
depths of
every year at
hell.
the
Yeah.
festival. if you look at my Instagram, there's a couple videos, and I want to say we have like 3,000 to 5,000 people watching us in this beer tent as we lift these stones, and it's
Too cool.
It's really cool. So if you're interested in competing or coming out and watching us, that's in September at the Columbus Oktoberfest. And then I just like to finish by saying, if anybody is interested or has any desire at all to go on a stone tour, to lift stones, to experience something new, no matter what it is, go out and do it. Because I was the person 4 years ago that was too afraid. I didn't think it was possible. And I told my wife, twisted my arm, and basically said, suck it up, go freaking do it. And I can't thank her enough. She's the one well, I can't, not even her. It's my whole family, my mom, my parents, my in-laws, my sister-in-law, brother-in-law, my wife. Literally everybody's watching my 3 kids as I go on these stone tours. And if it wasn't for them, none of this would be possible. But if anyone has any desire, any goals at all, don't sit around waiting. They're not going to happen for you. You need to go out and chase those goals, and you need to make them happen yourself.
Absolutely. It's awesome, man. Yeah. Well said. Well, I mean, from our point of view, we just want to thank you very, very much, man. Like, since I first got into stone lifting, you've been inspiration, and your research and all the things you've done. You're just a major part of my experience so far in this, and you're a great advocate for this. And so thank you for your time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please be so kind as to leave the show a review, and then follow us over on Instagram at stonesofstrength_podcast.